translucent saturation. And what we're going to do for the next hour is, you can ask questions or whatever you want to see, but there's a lot of works going up the stairwell and here in the gallery. And so what we'll do is have a walkabout and go through them. And Gabriel can tell you a little bit about each piece. In case you hadn't noticed, and for those of you who may have already looked on Instagram, they're predominantly black. They seem sculptural at first glance, but they are really derived out of painting. And you'll see elements that, well, painting and paint is the key feature. So paint is both medium for deploying color, but also becomes a binder and an element and part of the support. So Gabriel doesn't limit himself to just oil or acrylic. He also concrete and many other things that he picked up along the way. So there's a lot of things added, collaged and brought in, but not in a typical sort of collage. They're incorporated through the pigment and through the process. So they're rather elaborate. And some are in series, a lot of them are in pairs. They're all created individually, but when they have a dialogue amongst themselves, or if they were subdivided by being chainsawed in half or glued together, then we try to show the companion piece so you can kind of see the dialogue between the two of them. And then there is a really nice little series of actually works on paper that look like paintings. They're put on a canvas support, but they started as paper. But they're very textural and also black. I think they're probably one of the most elegant things. In fact, you're kind of pointing at them right now. This gentleman's standing in front of him. We'll zoom in on him a little bit here in a second. But so do you want to start
I'll probably
downstairs, or do you want to come up here and then go downstairs?
I was going to start here and then use the stairs to come down at the end. What do you think?
Yeah, and if people have the checklist, and everything's done with this one being sort of the first one, then that way people have a checklist or on their website, they can follow along with the details. So this is number 13. Perfect. Let me open it for you.
Gabriel.
All right, great. So this is where we'll start. Hi guys, I'm Gabriel J. Shuldiner. This is one of the pieces in my show. As you can see, it's extremely object-like. I do consider it a painting. As you can see, it's very sculptural. So this is one of the types of works that I make. Very sculptural, very organic, but yet at the same time, I work on traditional supports such as canvas, which these two are. These are actually the newest paintings that I've done in the series. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see the texture. You're not supposed to touch the paintings. So you can see like the traditional support, canvas, material. This has some concrete. It also has a lot of paint mixed together. And I'll back out so you can see it. That's his companion piece. I don't necessarily work directly in series, but I got two at this point that work independently. It's not a traditional diptych, so I didn't intentionally make two to show together. But in putting the show together, it kind of just came apart, get more detail inside of the painting. So I'm putting the show together, the two work really well together, and so we hung them together. So that's what you've seen so far, those three pieces. Lead you over here. Nothing more traditional than a black square for an artist to create. Obviously influenced by Ad Reinhardt on some level. However, when you're talking about influences, I'll cite Robert Ryman, I'll cite Bram Bogart and Pierre Soulages as icons to me. So that's kind of where, in terms of the history of painting, the artist that I'm most moved by. So again, this painting on a 2D screen, it looks kind of flat. Move in, you get to see it's crater-like. And this painting is made primarily with different types of paints and some construction material. hopefully you get the idea of the depth as I put my fingerprints all over the painting. And we'll move over here. Another super sculptural piece, although the support of this is a recycled frame. Basically, I had wanted to frame all of these works on paper that I'm showing you. And in doing that, I realized they work terribly in frames. So I ripped them out of the frame, put those paper pieces on the canvas backing, and then created this, which starts on a frame, broken frame. This is very cavernous, as you can see. The center goes in multiple inches. Some spray paint in the center, which you may or may not be able to see.
Yeah, it looks like pewter.
Yeah. I'll move over to here. These two pieces were originally one. I used a chainsaw to cut them apart because I was frustrated with how it was coming along as one object. And so one of the only tools I use a lot of different tools to manipulate the material to paint with. Some that I make, some are traditional. But my most unconventional tool is probably a chainsaw. That to create this piece.
Yeah. We lost the video. Thank you.
This piece is primarily recycled polystyrene foam, which is what gets the depth, and tons of paint. So in cutting it in half with a chainsaw, I kind of liked what I got. I flipped this one the other way, took off some of the material, and you have this, which again, they work well together as two, but they're not done intentionally to be a diptych. In that regards, I do not work in series. I create each object independently, but some work really well together, and this obviously did because of their conjoined history. And move over here, these were the pieces that I was just talking about a minute ago. They're all works on paper, and I actually considered them drawings. They didn't work in the frame. It was just an aesthetic. I tried to frame them. I wanted to have them just be very, drawing in a frame, and it looked too constricting for me. So I broke out the frames. Like I said, I used frames for other pieces as starting support. And then I adhered to drawings, which contain a lot of paint in and of themselves on canvas backing. So I'll go through each one very quickly, or not quickly, slowly. See the dimensions. Hard to get the fact, their textural, sculptural nature on a 2D screen. But it does give you an idea. Go over to this one. Again, a lot of paint, a lot of material. The way I work is combination, like very intuitively, let the materials do what they do, how they work together, how they don't work together. It's kind of fun and exciting for me to be a little chemist. However, there's a lot of intent too. Meaning I have an idea of what I want to accomplish with each piece, not just like a random accumulation of a material. These particular pieces are multiple layers of paint on paint on paint on canvas. And they read super traditional, which is okay. It was intentionally done that way. I do a lot of object-oriented pieces where the material becomes the support. You'll see more of them shortly. And I wanted to get personally, I just wanted to get, I guess, reconnect more with like the traditional history of painting, since I got pretty out there with some of the sculptures I was creating, sculptural paintings, I should say. So I went back to the square and the rectangle and deliberately started using canvas as the initial starting support. I get canvas, I stretch canvas, and then I paint it black. Sometimes I'll rip it, and then that's how it starts. I start responding to the errors and the glitches that I create after the pristine nature of the canvas is destroyed. So again, these pieces worked out as 5. They work beautiful together. But again, I didn't have an idea initially to make a 5-piece installation. Just kind of worked out that way. So then another shot of the whole installation that you've seen so far. And now we'll move over to a couple more that were cut with a chainsaw. Similar to the other 2 you saw, these are companion pieces that work well together. Originally, they were 1 piece, and I was just struggling with it. Something about the size or the shape, the orientation just wasn't working. One of those weird artist things I can't really explain. It just wasn't working. So then I started seeing it as 2 different pieces. And once I saw that, I broke out the chainsaw. And then you got 2 pieces that independently worked well together. And for the nature of the show, they work well as a diptych. The shadow is also, light is a huge part of my work. The way the light reflects off the different blacks, creating different whites and grays. So it's definitely, wouldn't say interactive, but part of seeing the work in person, you really get to see the effect of light. I mean, it's true for any visual art, but I'll say it's like more so specific because of my use of black and how like light reflects and refracts off the black. Makes the work come alive, and you get the element of the sculptural shadows, which becomes like integral to the piece. The way it's lit, the way the shadow is cast, it's all specific. Then we'll come over here. This is a smaller piece. Again, originally a work on canvas. I use color in my piece pretty sparingly. A lot of times I use it to make mental notes to myself about what I want to accomplish later on in the work. So they serve as like markers for me, like, maybe like cut the painting here, add more paint there, do this there, etc. And then as I create the work and the work gets resolved, I kind of leave the remnants of the paint as is. So they kind of work as little like subtle pops of color that kind of attract you to the piece and draw you into a specific location. But the reason that it was there originally is more of a secret. It's more of a note that I made to myself while I was creating the work. And again, as the work resolves itself, the paint, the spray paint or the applied color paint, enamel sometimes, what's left over, what's revealed, I used to just blacken it all out. And then I started leaving little hints of the color in and not blacking it out. And then I started really liking how it worked both as a little, get some more of the sculptural feeling for the work. I'm gonna move over here. We have another work that was originally made on a frame, broken frame from the other series. The pop of color obviously leads you right inside to the cavern of the deep piece. Like light flows through it if you're seeing it in person. Hard to see that on Zoom. But the sculptural nature of the piece, it comes out about 7 inches. And I consider it a painting versus a sculpture. But I'd say that's just semantics. But I'm drawn to the history of painting versus the history of sculpture. Here's another piece. Well, this piece that I just showed you actually had, support. It started on a broken frame. This piece is just solid material. Recycled polystyrene, which is packing material, is right here. Again, if you go in super deep, and you get the little effect of the 3 together as an installation. Then I'll come around to here where we have 2 little pieces. Not so little, 2.5 hands. And And then we'll come up here and go to the large painting. This is the largest piece in the show, about 62 inches by 49 inches by 6.75 inches. It's all on canvas. It contains no concrete like the other pieces that I showed. So even though it's heavy, it's not extremely heavy. I play with weight and density and mass in my work. And some pieces that actually weigh a lot look like they'd be light. And some pieces that weigh next to nothing look like they'd be dense and heavy. And that's based on the materials I use for that specific piece. And they kind of balance out. Like in the show, I have like enough, almost like an equal amount, super heavy, super light. And again, it's a weird artist thing. It just balances out in my mind. You can see it closely. There were notes in this painting too. You find the little marks of color. I know they're there. There's one deep inside. There's another deep inside. So I left them in as I created this piece, and it ultimately was a nice element. So I kept it in. Then we move over here. Another work on canvas with different types of paint, all acrylic. On canvas originally. Then we move over to this one. We have another really organic shaped piece. This baby like 10 inches deep. This piece is on canvas as a starting point. And in my mind, it reads like a painting, even though a lot of people would, say it's a sculpture. I say it's a painting. Here's another one. And if you look closely, we've got some of the material. Staples. It's a huge material list. I think it's listed online as well, all the materials that I use for each piece. It's pretty extravagant. And I list everything. So this one probably has the most color of any painting I have here. And with the right light, you get reflection of the fluorescent yellow against the wall. And then this is the last one of the series. Even though it's not a series, I don't do series, but in this wall series is what I meant. It's a piece primarily on canvas, a lot of recycled cardboard in this one. And you gotta look closely. I kind of keep the color in weird spots where you might not expect to find it. And the color scheme that I use pretty much mirrors construction sites, obviously, but that mirrors nature. And so when I look at my piece, they're all made with primarily like 21st century industrial materials, but I consider them like organic and ironically inspired by nature and shapes and forms. And the color scheme adds to that. I mean, I like draw on like lightning bugs, bees, wasps, they're always, butterflies, even birds, like the natural color scheme with the bright color with the black kind of means danger, I would assume, in nature. And so I kind of co-opt that. That's the history of the specific colors that I use. You'll always find them in nature in some capacity. And then I'll go over to these two. Again, this is the third piece that I use a chainsaw and chopping it up. There are two others that are still in my studio. Same situation. I was struggling with this as a one piece. Saw it as two separate pieces. and then had to make that a reality. So the chainsaw came out and then it became 2 pieces, which I pretty much finished up afterwards. This one's fun because the light reflects off the black. So you see a lot of silver and grays and whites, but then I also have mirror spray paint stuck in there as well. So kind of becomes what's the reflection and what's actually part of the paint. Makes it read differently depending on how the light hits it. Same with this. You have a little reflection here and here and here and here, but here is spray paint, silver. So these 2 work as a series. And that's pretty much the work on the main floor. Now I'm going to go down the stairway, which normally you would see when you first come in. And I'll start with this one, this piece. Yes, it's my homage to Soulages. He's one of my favorite painters. Paint. Frustrated with them originally, used the chainsaw, broke them in 2 pieces. But I had the orientation differently, and I was debating how to put them up, and I was working with David, owner of the gallery, and he suggested, have you put them horizontal? And I actually hadn't considered that. So I moved them around, put them horizontal on the floor, and like instantly had that click. I'm not sure why it works or why I felt that it works. Again, it's one of those weird artist things, but it worked. And then all of a sudden, these pieces became horizontal diptych, even though they were originally created as 1 piece that was then cut in canvas. And it's hard to see the depth here, but you have a deep groove here, and then it comes out several inches with the material. And so in my studio, they were shown separately. They weren't even together, and they were shown vertically. But for the show, and I think for the future of these little guys, they're going to stay reunited as horizontal pieces. And then we're going to go down the stairs. There's a fun little installation that David put together. Pieces going down the stairs or coming up the stairs, as you would find if you came to the gallery. This is the top piece. This piece is originally on canvas, but layered in so much paint you would never be able to notice. It's kind of small, it's not that big. Then we move down the stairs. This is another piece that has a companion piece. It's broken apart by chainsaw. This has a lot of concrete in it, a lot of polystyrene, polyurethane, tons of acrylic paint. Pretty much all that I use are green construction materials, not green in color, but green in light, being not toxic. The work looks super toxic, but it's not. Here's the companion piece. It went with the one that I just showed you that was then cut in half and became its own independent object. And it worked well on the stairway. And you come down a little further. This is probably the oldest piece in the show and the only piece that has any other color other than black or the spray paint you've seen. It's got some titanium white in there. And if you look closely, it's got little covered over signature. It's a cardboard piece backed on canvas and stretcher. And it reads like that when you see it in person, you can tell. It's not covered in that much paint. And again, it's not that big. I play obviously with scale in my work. You saw a couple larger pieces upstairs, and now you're at the kind of small pieces. This piece is actually one of my favorites. Probably the second oldest in the pieces, which means it's probably 2019. Originally, it's on canvas, but it's filled with so much paint. The support almost doesn't matter. The support becomes the paint itself at some point. And you got a little dash of color at the top, little light blue, and you've got the reflective silver. Then you move here. The next two pieces I'm going to show you were started on recycled EPS polystyrene panel, which is used for insulation. And it's coated with so much paint that it almost becomes another object. But that's the density you see here, which makes this piece particularly light. And then on top of it, I have canvas. This piece, I would say, is maybe my homage to Stephen Perino. There was another one of probably like my fourth favorite artist ever. Look on the top, you got some silver, and then you got some orange on the top of the piece. Super organic shape. And then you've got another piece that worked well together, so we hung them together. It's another canvas ripped off the stretcher, recycled into the painting. And again, you can see the side, the panel, the polystyrene panel. And then that leads right to my other favorite piece of the show. This piece is like small, but it's super heavy. It's mostly concrete and paint. And then if we go down the stairs, you can see the last two in the show, which would be the first two pieces you would see if you were walking into the gallery. They were made independently again. They weren't made to be a diptych. On canvas, stretched. And you've got layers and layers of paint on top. And a lot of the deconstruction that happens as I create the work is just as important as the construction. So I build it up, I take it down. That becomes the final piece. And that's my show, guys. That's translucent saturation. I suppose if anyone has any questions, I'll answer them. And then that kind of would conclude the Zoom walkthrough.
Yeah, I'm curious how heavy they are.
Depends on which piece you're talking about.
Excuse me?
It depends on which piece you're talking about. These pieces right here are pretty light. Easily to handle. Easy to handle. Some of the pieces upstairs, which I'll go back and I'll just like remind everybody. The larger pieces are super heavy. I'd say maybe they're about 80, 85 pounds. I have to check the material list. I list the weights of the piece as well as the dimensions and material.
Yeah, I'm on the Wi-Fi, so if you want to say bye to everybody.
Thanks, guys. I'm back. Sorry, technical problems. Is anyone still there?
We're here.
Yep, we're here.
Any questions?
So Gabriel, you were talking that your work looks very toxic,
Yes.
and yet it isn't.
Yes.
Is that contradiction in terms why it's named translucent? Or maybe it's just visual thinking?
The name translucent saturation, just words came to my mind when I just thought about light and how light affects objects. Actually, technically, it makes no sense, which was also another reason why I chose it. Translucent, the definition of it, and saturation, like typically they wouldn't go together. The toxicity or the non-toxicity of the work is completely independent of that. And I just kind of, part of it is I want to make my work, you know, like the aesthetic that I have just happens to be what it is, the brute minimalism that I call it, and it happens to look kind of, you know, dangerous. But it's fun working with materials that independently of themselves are not dangerous and making them look that way. But a lot of it is thinking, I don't want to be using actual oil paint in my work. That's like a health decision. And that kind of does dictate some of the other work that materials that I use, I'm trying to be safe.
Brute minimalism is a great way to put it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for coming. Anyone else?
Yeah, how did these evolve? Where, let's say 5 years ago, hi, Gabriel.
Hi. How did they evolve as what, for the show?
From where, what was the seed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever?
I mean, honestly, when I start each piece, I imagine it as a traditional black square as like a starting point psychologically. And then I just think about how I can kind of like manipulate and twist the idea of a black square into these bizarre objects. So I kind of see them in a weird way, like, you know, stretching apart, ripping around each other, like becoming intertwined, and these weird shapes in my mind come out that I then try to recreate. But in terms of how I work, like, obviously you can see how nicely it's curated here. I work with a lot of pieces all in front of me, kind of manic, and I bounce ideas off different pieces depending on, you know, what I'm working on. I kind of think of it as like a little universe, and I've got like paintings everywhere, and one painting over here informs another painting over there, and I just kind of like work back and forth, and then eventually a piece kind of resolves itself or gets close to being resolved, and then I'll like go in and just focus on that particular piece and like really hone in on what I'm trying to accomplish. And then at some point that piece gets spit out and it's complete or almost complete, and I go back to like my crazy, like manic way of working. But in terms of how I want to show them in its most minimal sense as possible. And I think I accomplished that with this show. But the genesis, like, it's just, I want to make bizarre looking black objects that, you know, just kind of, I find them to be beautiful, but also like very confusing, and intentionally so. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Sure. It's the beginning. I like seeing them in all that space.
Yeah, I like seeing them like this too. It's the way they're meant to be seen.
Right.
Anyone else? Any questions? Anyone still there?
Yes, we're here. Great show, Gabe. Really beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for looking. Thank you for coming. Thank you to the technology that made this work and then failed, and then made it work again. And thanks to the gallery for hosting this. I appreciate it. Thank you, Richard.
You're welcome, Gabriel. From Santa Fe.
I do. I want to come by and see you guys.
Anytime.
I should do it. All right, guys. Thank you.
Hey.
That
Have
wraps
a
it
good
up.
night.
Thank you very much for coming, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Gabriel.
Thank you.